The final item of business is a members' debate on motion 18 in the name of Colin Beattie on recognising the damaging impact of antisocial behaviour. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Would those members who wish to speak in this debate please press their request to speak buttons. And I call on Colin Beattie to open the debate.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Firstly, let me make the simple statement that in my constituency of Midlothian North, antisocial behaviour is out of control. Over the past 3 to 4 years, there has been a steady increase in incidents, much to the distress of constituents. Now, I don't minimise the efforts made by the local council and the police to manage the situation. However, in my opinion, they simply do not have the tools to do this effectively, which is why I am raising this in my members' debate. So let's look at the nature of the various forms of antisocial behaviour. Young people, let's focus on them, but remember that adults of all ages can also be part of the problem. Yes, there is clear evidence that youngsters from primary school and above are creating mayhem. Setting fire to plastic recycling bins is a great favourite. But fighting, mostly between themselves in public, is frequent and causes considerable anxiety among residents. Dalkeith Town Centre is almost a no-go zone at night. Youths in dark clothing and balaclavas seem to feature at the centre of the problems. Many people associate free bus travel with antisocial behaviour. However, that is not the only cause. It's merely a tool some young people use. Abuse of the National Entitlement Card should not be acceptable, nor should antisocial behaviour in public transport. The level of behaviour on buses is unacceptable. Both passengers and bus drivers should not have to tolerate the level of misbehaviour and intimidation which a group of youngsters or adults can create. We're not going to persuade people to use the bus if it's not safe to use. Nor is it reasonable to expect bus drivers to police their buses, given the likely response. A solution must be found, and uplifting bus passes from offenders would be a start, although I suspect a more robust response than that will be needed. When dealing with underage youngsters, the police say they have few options. They have no real deterrent unless serious criminal activity is involved. Shoplifting. It's become a lucrative hobby for some people of all ages. I was recently contacted by a supermarket seeking help because they were losing around £25,000 over a 6-month period. Other retailers complain about the level of theft from their shops. Retailers also complain that there is nothing can be done. They call the police and no one responds, or the police visit but rarely catch the criminals involved. If they're caught, then this serious crime is treated as minor, and they are rarely sent to prison, even if they are frequent offenders. Shoplifters are straight back out onto the streets and offending. This is not a deterrent. I know the police find this very frustrating. Speaking to police, they are clear that shoplifting most often falls within 2 broad categories. Either they're organised criminal gangs, or they are individual drug addicts stealing to feed their habit. Most frequently, theft from supermarkets is alcohol or steaks. These are then sold in pubs and other gathering points. The cost of shoplifting is directly felt in our pockets as retailers recoup the costs. This is not a victimless crime. Young people using motorcycles or e-bikes have become both an annoyance and a hazard. The noise is intrusive and disturbing, and the damage done to public areas is considerable. They cause fear and upset, especially among older residents. Antisocial behaviour in schools is increasing, with attacks on teachers and other pupils becoming commonplace. While this is too big an issue in itself to be expanded on here, it's all part and parcel of the fundamental shift in our society which needs addressed urgently. Many constituents have contacted me to express their concerns and worries if antisocial behaviour is not checked. Indeed, a very young constituent just recently tackled me on what was being done to make her and our communities safer. And to her I say that my bringing this to Parliament is part of moving to a solution. So these are the main issues, but what can be done to deal with them? Firstly, the police have made it clear to me that legislation around e-bikes is not up to date and leaves them in a difficult position when dealing with situations involving e-bikes. And I would ask the Scottish Government to consult with the police to ensure legislation is fit for purpose and will support the police in dealing with this issue. Secondly, school curriculums must not only provide information on the rights which young people have, but just as importantly, their obligations and responsibilities to society as a whole. And thirdly, this Parliament across the Chamber quite rightly passed legislation protecting the rights of young people. Now, young people are using this legislation to evade responsibility for their actions. For example, during the recent Holyrood election, on polling day there was a disturbance at one of our polling stations caused by a large group of primary school teachers fighting in the doorway of the polling station. One of them shouted at adults who tried to intervene, "We know our rights. You can't touch us, or we'll call the police." Parliament needs to explore with police and local councils what measures can reasonably be put in place to stop this violence and misbehaviour. And again, I emphasise, this is not just about young people who are responsible for misbehaviour. We must protect the rights of our young people, but we also need to protect the rights of our citizens to live peaceably and without fear or disturbance. I would want to make it clear that maintaining young people's rights are very important as a protection. However, it is clear that appropriate deterrents to bad behaviour need to be in place. Now, I don't pretend to be an expert in the areas which I've touched on, such as education, but this Parliament has access to many who are experts and should be able to agree on balanced solutions. We all know what the outcome needs to be. Now we need to agree on the path to achieve that outcome. Thank you.
I now call Carol Mockin.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank Colin Beattie for bringing this really important debate to the Chamber. I'm sorry I'm not in the Chamber this evening. I was at a funeral this afternoon, but I wanted to speak in this debate because I have, in my South Scotland region, had frequent casework from constituents regarding dangerous and antisocial behaviour. One example regularly brought up is the damage caused by illegal e-bikes, motorbikes and quad bikes, as mentioned by Colin Beattie. Residents, particularly in rural towns and villages, describe illegal e-bikes as being driven recklessly and at high speed, often on pavements. In other cases, motorbikes, quad bikes or other petrol off-driven vehicles are destroying community and private land on a regular basis. Play parks, farmlands, they don't distinguish. Residents are understandably concerned about the safety and the well-being and are saying to me that they are genuinely fearful that someone may be seriously injured or killed because of this dangerous behaviour. I, like Colin Beattie, commend the work of my local police Scotland officers and their efforts to control and prevent antisocial behaviour, particularly when the services face mounting resource pressures and policing numbers are particularly challenging in these remote villages. But more must be done to ensure that policing is adequately resourced, supported and well equipped to deal with this behaviour. I recognise that increased and visible community policing can impact deterrence. However, fundamentally addressing antisocial behaviour goes beyond placing more feet on the ground. If we want to make our streets safer, protect communities and address the problem in the long run, then we need to look at the deeper, wider societal issues. We need to look at tackling the root cause of antisocial behaviour. A Scottish Government review into Scotland's approach to antisocial behaviour identified a number of systemic, deep-rooted and highly complex issues. These include poor mental health, misuse and influence of drugs and alcohol, poverty, stigma and stereotypes, and also included housing. The culture of binge drinking in Scotland is a subject I have spoken about in the Chamber before. Scotland faces an alcohol crisis, with alcohol-related deaths and disease being one of the biggest challenges our society faces. Not only is excessive drinking harmful to the individual, but there is a clear link between harmful drinking and criminal behaviour, with a high number of the prison population reported as being under the influence of alcohol at the time of their offence. At the same time, we also know that the root cause of alcohol misuse are often linked to poverty and deprivation, which are also connected to antisocial behaviour. So none of these issues, antisocial behaviour, alcohol misuse, poverty, can be viewed in isolation. An independent working group on antisocial behaviour came to that similar conclusion. The group tasked with developing a long-term framework for addressing antisocial behaviour, focusing on prevention and early intervention resolutions. It emphasised that antisocial behaviour cannot be viewed in isolation. Rather, it stems from a deep-rooted, cross-cutting societal issues, including poverty, housing, as I said, food insecurity, and a lack of access to the support services that people need. The group concluded that reducing antisocial behaviour requires tackling these fundamental drivers and that there must be investment in prevention and support. This could mean investment in local groups, community initiatives and activities for young people to engage, things such as sport. But equally important is having strong leadership to drive that societal change required to reduce antisocial behaviour. And I would invite the Minister to outline how the Government intends to progress this work on a cross-portfolio basis, which I've spoken about before, just as we go into this new Parliament. Tackling the root causes of antisocial behaviour is a real investment, and I really value the opportunity to discuss it tonight and thank Colin Beattie again for bringing it to the Chamber. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
I call Don Black to be followed by Kate Nevins. Don Black.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to point to my register of interests as the chair of Kincardine and Mearns Youth Club's charity as well. We all know that antisocial behaviour can impact local communities through severe psychological distress, increased strain on police and public resources, and the degradation of town centres and housing estates. This has already been mentioned. The most profound effect being the long-term impact on the mental and physical health of the victims. Noise nuisance, harassment and intimidation cause sleep deprivation, severe anxiety, and make residents change their daily routines to avoid known trouble spots. And there's also the strain on police and public resources, with police leaders consistently warning that the high numbers of low-level complaints like public nuisance, vandalism and underage drinking can divert valuable resources away from tackling more serious crimes. And widespread antisocial behaviour, including fire-raising, off-road biking, irresponsible riding of illegal e-scooters and littering in derelict and rural areas, can generate a widespread fear of crime, making residents feel unsafe in their own neighbourhoods and discouraging people from fully utilising their local amenities. And we need to ensure that we have strategies prioritising early intervention and more foot patrols rather than solely relying on criminal justice outcomes. But Mr Beattie concentrates on the behaviour of young people for antisocial behaviour, but from the police reports that I see in my local area, there is actually more antisocial behaviour coming from adults, drunken and abusive behaviour in the street and on public transport, waste accumulation in gardens, attracting vermin, neighbourhood noise, arguments and fighting are all issues that are reported to me regularly by constituents. But I don't want to stand here and be accusatory of any particular group. I want to balance the debate we're having here this evening. Antisocial behaviour does have negative impacts where it happens, but what we need to consider is that it is necessary to encourage all members of our communities, whether they be young or old, to take pride in the place that they live and have consideration of their neighbours, to give them purpose and take an active role in their community, as those with pride of place are far more likely to look after it and their neighbours. Because I also believe that often the perpetrators of that very behaviour are actually victims themselves. They may find themselves in a spiral of behaviour from which they just don't know how to extricate themselves. Those people that are reported as being problem neighbours, what is actually going on in their lives that is making them act in the way that they do? Perhaps a friendly ear and a listen for support is what is actually needed, and not hostility and complaints. Behaviour, good or bad, comes from how a person is coping with whatever their personal situation is. And none of us know for sure what has happened in a person's life that could trigger such behaviours. Understanding and compassion can go a long way. And where services are needed, as mentioned by Carol Mohan there, people need to be helped to get that support. A major issue when so many public support services are being cut by local authorities because of budget constraints. So yes, we need more police presence for prevention, but we can also use civic education in schools to instil good values in our young people. We also need better support and social services for that prevention and intervention piece with adults. If we tackle the root causes of antisocial behaviour, the impacts can be lessened. More universal youth clubs, like the charity that I run, for young people, have constructive and safe places to go without judgment and how to learn to socialise and have social responsibility. Call-outs for adult community engagement and welcoming community groups for them to contribute to their place. Ensure signposting to support services for all and also help those support services to provide that appropriate intervention through adequate funding to keep doors open. We, as parliamentarians and community leaders, have a responsibility to lead this charge in our work here in this place and at committee, in support of our local communities, as leaders, as neighbours and as friends. Thank you.
I call Kate Nevins to be followed by Liam Kerr. Kate Nevins.
I thank Colin Beattie for bringing this motion to a members' debate. I fully share the members' belief in the need to support young people and their families, and I recognise that even after over 20 years of the Antisocial Behaviour Scotland Act, many in our communities still feel antisocial behaviour is a major problem, making this an important topic for discussion. However, I also think that given we've had 20 years of this Act, we need to look again at how we understand, define and respond to antisocial behaviour and come up with some new ideas and approaches. I have a number of concerns about how we often talk about antisocial behaviour. I worry about how we use the term to lump together a lot of different issues, sometimes using it to refer to criminal behaviours, including things like sexual harassment and forms of violence against women and girls, while often also using it to refer to behaviours that are things we just don't really like young people hanging out in the streets or in parks when perhaps they have limited options for where to go. I also worry about how accusations of antisocial behaviour can be used to demonise certain groups of people, particularly young people or communities of colour. While we turn a blind eye to middle-class families who use mosquito noisemakers outside their homes, something that is actively harmful and painful to young people merely walking down the street, yet this is not necessarily considered antisocial. As the members' motion notes, we need to be thinking about prevention of, not just response to, the variety of behaviours that are causing harm in our society, properly understanding the underlying social and economic causes and consequences of harmful behaviour, and how different communities are affected differently by harm, and what it means for everyone in a community to feel safe and thrive. Looking firstly at the perception that antisocial behaviour is caused mostly by young people, something this motion focuses heavily on, the little data we have actually tells a very different story. The most recent statistics show that 2/3 of those convicted for antisocial behaviour-related offences were over the age of 30. This errant focus on young people has consequences. As the government's independent working group on antisocial behaviour has argued, by focusing solely on young people, we risk ignoring root causes and reinforcing harmful cycles of alienation and mistrust between generations, continuing unhelpful stereotypes of young people, which impacts policy and decision-making. The same group found that the loss of community resources like sports centres, swimming pools, as Dawn Black has mentioned, and youth services, impacts negatively on community resilience, and where community resilience is low, the risk of antisocial behaviour increases. It is no coincidence that the communities that experience the most recorded antisocial behaviour are those that have been most exposed to austerity and face the highest rates of poverty and inequality. People of colour, too, are often impacted unequally by attempts to tackle perceived antisocial behaviour. As I raised earlier today at General Questions, desire for crackdowns on antisocial use of e-bikes has the potential to further marginalise food delivery riders, with people of colour overrepresented in this highly exploitative part of our labour market. We also need to better understand how women experience antisocial behaviour. Classing the harassment of women and girls, the harassment we face in our streets, in our schools, in our public transport as antisocial behaviour, and as a similar level of concern to something like graffiti, belittles our societal problem of misogyny and deeply ingrained patterns of violence against women. I'm not standing here denying existence of antisocial behaviour or rejecting people's legitimate concerns. Indeed, the communities that we stand up for most as Greens, those experiencing poverty and inequality, are those most impacted by it. But there are serious problems in the way that we are currently tackling the issue. Our approach in Scotland is still focused on antisocial behaviour as an individual problem. rather than as expression of too many parts of our society being left behind. And that's something we should be looking to change. Thank you.
Liam Kerr, to be followed by Catherine Sangster. Liam Kerr.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I congratulate Colin Beattie on securing this member's business and actually commend his speech, which set out the issues very bluntly and I thought very well, because regrettably we know all about the damaging impact of antisocial behaviour in Aberdeen and the North East. Statistically, by far the most recorded antisocial offences are threatening or abusive behaviour, with drunkenness and other disorderly conduct the second largest category. These behaviours are present everywhere, as we've heard today, but particularly in parts of Aberdeen city centre, and particularly since the closure of our M&S in Union Street. Indeed, in the last year, police were called to Union Street almost 2,000 times to deal with a spike in criminality, with thefts and fighting dominating. Disgustingly, 2 police officers were assaulted by a large group of youths when officers stopped an electric motorbike and issued a warning to a shoplifter in a part of Aberdeen recently. These thugs went on to vandalise the police car. Now, I mentioned the M&S earlier on. Just last month, police had to deal with the disgusting graffiti which appeared all over it. It's the sort of vandalism which is increasingly rife throughout the city centre. And Aberdeen remembers only too well, only a few years ago, when police told our citizens that youths from as far away as Tayside are taking advantage of the free bus pass that Colin Beattie brought up to visit Aberdeen and cause mayhem in the city centre. And the e-bikes that were alluded to earlier, well, they're tearing up and down Union Street in a second, intimidating people, forcing them off pavements and being ridden illegally, often with no licence or with no insurance. And we all have heard of the alleged connections to drug dealing. I'll take the intervention.
Michelle Campbell.
I thank the member for taking my intervention. I do appreciate the good member's points that he's raised. I think that all of us can associate with some of the experiences that he's been so good to raise in the chamber today. Does he agree in respect to some of the systemic issues that also need to be addressed, that there's more cultural-based aspects, take away age, demographics out of it, that in terms of Scotland's relationship with violence in general, it has shifted over the decades, but there is still other aspects. For example, around gender-based violence, in particular that impact on young men, we have to have legislation there to best support women and girls. But the fact that it culturally still exists remains to be the issue. So would the member agree that we need to do more for young men and young boys to make sure that this actually manages to come under control? Thank you.
Liam Kerr.
I thank Michelle Campbell for the intervention. Yes, I do agree with that. I think she's actually brought up a very important point, and it's something that I was going to refer back to Kate Nevin's speech later on, because I think that's right. Yes, there's antisocial behaviour, and yes, I will continue to talk about the antisocial behaviour and some of the solutions that we put in our manifesto. But I think structurally and systemically there are an awful lot of things going on here, and certainly when I had the Justice portfolio in the last Parliament, I was very keen to work cross-party with the Deputy Presiding Officer and Angela Constance, the then Minister, to make sure that we recognise all the systemic issues that go towards criminality generally and antisocial behaviour. So I actually welcome the point, and I think it was well made. Because the antisocial behaviour we're talking about is not confined to Union Street. Twice in the last 3 months, the Nig Bay Golf Club has been torn apart by those e-bikes that I was talking about. It's a cost of about £4,000. And shoplifting, which Colin Beattie brought up, has become the clearest symbol of everyday disorder. The Scottish Retail Consortium says it's been effectively decriminalised. So this is a real problem. And I thought Colin Beattie raised the issues well. But it was also brave to raise them, since we've had 20 years of an SNP government which has failed to address this, but has also created conditions that arguably are conducive to antisocial behaviour, because there's no analysis under which 1,000 fewer police officers is going to reduce antisocial behaviour. No way that reducing visible local policing deters it. Releasing criminals after a third of their sentences, bringing in a presumption against short-term sentences and jailing under 25s whilst cutting community action. It's a criminal's charter. And then there's the under-22 bus passes. The government gave them, but failed to include a mechanism to take them away for antisocial behaviour. And very briefly, Presiding Officer, I did say I'd mention Kate Nevin's speech because I think the point that she made about the brutal cuts vested in communities and community services by this government really hasn't helped. And I think that was a good point, well made. Presiding Officer, I am always keen to help. Recently, I authored the Justice section of the Conservative Manifesto, which I'm pleased to say is full of solutions. I'm not sure I'll be given the time, Kate Nevins.
Well, the member's winding up and he's running out of time. He's already taken his additional time, and the general rule is that interventions shouldn't be made whilst winding up.
I'm very grateful, but apologies, next time. We'll talk offline. Because the solutions in the Conservative Manifesto were things like tougher regulations for tackling the e-bikes with mandatory registration and licensing, increasing maximum fines and a three-strikes policy for antisocial behaviour and shoplifting, ensuring meaningful and genuine community sentences and increasing police patrols, much more besides. So I close by saying to the Minister, we have a major issue with antisocial behaviour in Scotland. This government has utterly failed to get a handle on it. The solutions are there in the Conservative Manifesto. I'll be delighted to work with her to implement them and address this scourge for once and for all.
Catherine Sangster to be followed by Andrew Baxter. Catherine Sangster.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We've all heard deeply concerning stories from our constituents, residents feeling unsafe in their own communities, businesses facing threats and vandalisms, and workers subjected to unacceptable abuse simply for doing their jobs. I'm really grateful to Colin Beattie for bringing this motion forward, and also to the other contributions from the members. And I do want to point out that it's quite right that we are looking at cuts in our communities and structural issues of poverty. The experiences that he shared from Midlothian North will resonate with members across this chamber because they are not unique to one community. Unfortunately, they're being felt right across my region and indeed right across Scotland. And that's why we need a collective response from this chamber. During the election campaign, antisocial behaviour was one of the issues that came up door after door. Time and time again, people spoke about the disruption to their neighbourhoods, the damage being done to public spaces, and the impact that that persistent disorder was having on the quality of their lives. I've also heard from local businesses dealing with graffiti, vandalism and abuse directed at staff, and sometimes racial abuse, and no one should have to face that simply for going to work. Free bus travel is fantastic, but it's no use if people are too scared to get on that bus. Parents want their kids to have the freedom to use their bus passes and explore and learn to do that responsibly, but they feel unsafe when they go on buses if there's antisocial behaviour. In Edinburgh, we've had a particular challenge around bonfire night in areas such as Craigmillar and Niddrie. Thankfully, this year there was a marked improvement. And whilst that was partly due to Edinburgh Council's introduction of firework control zones, it was also because communities themselves stepped forward and took action. Local organisations, community leaders and volunteers worked together to provide positive alternatives and to create safe and exclusive family events that brought people together and brought communities together. In doing so, they demonstrated something important, that prevention is just as important as enforcement. I want to pay tribute to everyone that was involved in that work, including Police Scotland. However, the rise in antisocial behaviour that we've witnessed in recent years did not happen in isolation. The number of full-time equivalent police officers is now almost 900 lower than it was a decade ago. And at the same time as Police Scotland are being required to make more efficiencies, many communities have seen a reduced visible police presence on their high streets and in their neighbourhoods. Visible community policing matters. It helps to deter the kind of behaviour that we're talking about today, but also reassures residents. And it allows officers to build positive relationships with local people, particularly young people. Police Scotland must have the resource it needs to maintain that presence. As we move into the summer months, communities deserve confidence that they will not experience the kind of disruption we've seen in recent years, including in places such as Portobello Beach. Reviewing existing programmes and considering new approaches is an important first step, but reviews alone are not enough. It must lead to a clear plan of action backed by the resources necessary to deliver meaningful change. Scottish Labour had a number of proposals that it set out to tackle antisocial behaviour, but it was the SNP that won the election, so I would call on the Minister to deliver on their election promises and make our communities safer. One of the promises was a trial fund for social impact partners. And it would be really good to see clarity from the Government on when that fund will be established, how success will be measured and how that trial will be evaluated, and crucially what action will follow from its findings. Our constituents want safe communities, they want thriving local businesses on their high street, and they deserve to feel safe in their public spaces. And it's our responsibility in this chamber to ensure they get it.
Andrew Baxter, to be followed by Duncan Dunlop. Andrew Baxter.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and may I direct members to my register of interests as a serving member of Highland Council, and may I thank Colin Beattie for securing this debate today. Now, I realise members left in the chamber are, unlike me, likely to rush out on a Thursday morning to buy this week's edition of the Le Carbe News, but if they had done so this morning, they would see that this debate is timely from a constituency perspective, because the front page features news about the extended closure of the public toilets in Fort William because of antisocial behaviour leading to vandalism. And I want to use that where others have pointed to maybe some of the causes of antisocial behaviour and the measures that are required to tackle that. I want to use my contribution to highlight how many essential services are being lost as a result of antisocial behaviour, particularly when it leads to vandalism. And the closure of the public toilets in Fort William are just an example of that, because although these public toilets are vital, they're not statutory. And when they are vandalised, they are under threat of closure, and in many cases across the Highlands, we have seen extended or permanent closure of such facilities, not just in Fort William, but Portree, Aviemore, Ballachulish, and across the Highlands. And that has a direct impact not only on our local communities, but on the important tourism economy that we rely on. And the reason this is happening is because our councils are facing increased costs that are escalating and unsustainable. What may seem like relatively small levels of antisocial behaviour soon accumulate. So vandalism involving toilet rolls strewn across public toilets becomes wash basins or urinals ripped from the walls. And then that goes on to wheelie bins being set on fire. Or even in the case of incidences in Fort William, the perpetrators of all that antisocial behaviour leading to a physical assault of a hotel worker. And I understand the frustration of our police when they are dealing with these issues. I had the situation where my police inspector told me that he actually had to threaten the arrest of the father of one of the young people that had been taken to the police station having been apprehended for antisocial behaviour and vandalism. And no wonder we have a problem if that is the attitude of parents in these circumstances. So Colin Beattie's motion is right to highlight this. And the police are also frustrated about the limitations of our children's panels in dealing with these incidents. And whilst none of us want to criminalise our young people, it is right that we look at the underlying causes identified in Colin Beattie's motion and look at how we support young people and their families, as he puts it, to stop the problem at source. And he's right to identify the hard work of our police. But the simple fact, Minister, that particularly in large rural geographies like my own and Karen Black and Liam Kerr's, they are overstretched. And they simply cannot deal with these issues. And we can't be in a situation where Catherine Sangster says that they can be seen in our communities and our young people can develop that healthy relationship with our police. So in conclusion, I hope that we hear from the Minister when she responds this evening how she plans to redirect resources to tackle these issues, how we can strengthen the existing measures that we already have at our disposals, and how she will consider introducing any additional measures to look at those issues that have been identified by members this evening.
Duncan Dunlop.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Thank you, Colin Beattie, for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I would begin by declaring an interest that I am a member of the SSC. It is one of the oldest youth organisations in Scotland. They're on camps up the A9, just off from the House of Brewer. And if any of you have secondary school-aged children, I recommend you send them there for the most incredible week that they will have. Indeed, without that field in the sun and the midges, I doubt very much I would be in this chamber today. Some may well believe that would be a good thing and I shouldn't have gone there. I don't know which path I would have taken. But I am also, I declare the interest, a youth worker. It's my professional background, the second degree I took. I've done community and youth work in many different places and countries in the world. It's been my privilege. But I'll do my second beginning of this with a quote. Young people, when not guided well, can be ruled by strong passions and tend to qualify them indiscriminately with anger and impulse rather than reason. That quote was over 2,000 years ago and is attributed to Aristotle. Indeed, if we come to more modern times, we can think of the mods and rockers. That might be what Colin Beattie might remember in terms of the youth culture conflict in the 1960s, and that's when they also ran round in mopeds, causing carnage. Young people, my point is, they've always done this in terms of finding themselves, expressing themselves, being judged. And, yes, they cross the line. And if there's an issue, the police come knocking, and what my colleague Andrew Baxter was saying. And if there's a parent in there, more often than enough, the dad, and it is normally the dad or the mum's a strong parental figure in that household, will say, we'll sort this out, thank you very much. But what if there isn't a parent at home, if there isn't stability? And what we saw in Glasgow and across Scotland actually last night wasn't antisocial behaviour, it crossed into criminality. But for young people who are caught up in the fever of what's happening, they don't know where that line is. They're not there because they're actually at the heart of it racist. They're caught up in the adrenaline and nobody helping them think through what they are about to do and the consequences of it. So, antisocial behaviour, if it's not addressed, can spiral. And without positive role models, that's what happens. And as some people have rightly said, it often is within the adult population what we see, fairly unpleasant, if not criminal behaviour, that's what happens. But politically, we can see through history this has been an issue. We've had the black shirts and the brown shirts of Hitler and Mussolini. We've also more recently had the Nashi, who has become now the movement of the first in Russia. Because why is it strong men, if we like to call them inappropriate, let's call it nationalist, populist politicians, peddling a different rhetoric, see the power and influence of young people, who will hold strong opinions, but from my knowledge of work with young people, will move quite quickly if given an alternative. And part of this for me is, I bring back to my first speech in Tony MacDonald, who I talked about within that. He didn't have the 50p to enter the youth club. Instead, he was offered his first joint. And he went on to cause 10 years of mayhem and disruption at huge cost to society himself and to the police. And when I went to visit Parliament, one of my first times ever in about 2012, the governor there was Derek McGill, and he told me 80% of the young people in there came from the care system. Hadn't had that positive role model, hadn't had the intervention, and it has spiralled. But bringing that back to last night, there was a Youth Link ran a very good event, and their Castle Youth Project, a worker from there, reminded me that in one of the most deprived communities in Scotland, when young people were asked, hey, what do you want to change? They went, nothing. Why? Because that's all they'd seen, the lives they'd lived. How do you open their minds and live and be in spaces and places where they can see the potential for what can happen? Because they will otherwise get into a narrative with social media and spiral into other behaviours. I could go back to the SSC, but time is limited. I see, in terms of what happens when I took care experience people there for 6 years camping, their masks would lift. They would see they were not just a kid who weren't lovable, that they were a community of people who had real value, could contribute and could make difference. But the stark reality is, I'd say in closing, in the last 8 years, this SNP government has cut by 50% the budget for youth work. That is intolerable if we want to make change. Youth Link, and I'll finish with this, 3 asks are, don't judge young people. Give them a right to youth work, to find out who their true self is. To do that, they need spaces, youth work spaces within which they can do that. And for that, the sector needs funding over the long term. That will be one of our biggest changes in how we can address antisocial behaviour with a preventative agenda. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
And I remind the Chamber that the convention is that there should not be interventions or interruptions on a first speech. And to make a first speech and to wind up, on behalf of the Scottish Government, I call on Kirstine Oswald.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. I'm very pleased to close this debate and I thank Colin Beattie for securing it. I welcome the constructive contributions that have been made across the Chamber this afternoon. As has been pointed out, it's an issue that is of broad interest. I'm honoured to be the Minister for Victims and Community Safety, with responsibility for supporting victims, strengthening community safety and ensuring that prevention sits right at the heart of our approach. This feels like an appropriate debate, therefore, to make as my first speech for the MSP for Eastwood. And given that it is my first speech, I hope, Presiding Officer, that you'll allow me to make some brief remarks. Firstly, about Eastwood, a place like no other in Scotland, diverse, energetic and community-focused. It's a real privilege to represent all of our Eastwood communities and to do so as the first SNP member in this particular seat. Of course, that's testament to an extraordinary local campaign, and I owe a great debt of gratitude to everyone who worked so hard. And I'd also like to put on the record my appreciation and my good wishes to my predecessor, Jackson Carlaw. I have appreciated his thoughtful advice and handover in recent weeks, and I know that members here will want to thank him, as I do, for all his work over many years and to wish him well. Let me also place on record my sincere thanks to my predecessor, Siobhan Brown, for her dedication and very valuable work. Presiding Officer, when it comes to antisocial behaviour and crime, the Scottish Government's approach is very clear. As Dawn Black emphasised, prevention is key, early intervention and effective responses. And I want to assure members that continuing to work closely with justice partners to drive down reoffending, to support rehabilitation and to ensure that communities are safer as a result is a key objective for me. And to do that, we need collaboration with and between local authorities, Police Scotland, third sector organisations and, very importantly, the people living in communities themselves. Now, if I can touch on some of the comments which have been made in the debate, Colin Beattie spoke about concerns about free bus passes, as did Liam Kerr. And of course, the vast majority of people who benefit from free bus travel do so responsibly. But where there has been and where there is antisocial behaviour, that is obviously of concern. The legislation that we're implementing aims to act as a deterrent for people acting in an unreasonable way, and the notion of removing that privilege of free bus travel is something that is there, and it's recognised that people of all ages can engage in unacceptable behaviour. I know I will consider an intervention since he's asked.
Liam Kerr.
I'm genuinely very grateful. The Minister is talking about the free bus passes and the provision that was brought in March to remove them, but obviously that's subject to consultations and regulations coming in. Can she give us a timeline on when that might actually happen?
Minister.
I appreciate the intervention, and I'm happy to take interventions as it happens. I'll happily write to Mr Kerr with further detail about that. I think it's an issue that is of interest to people. I also want to touch on Catherine Sangster's points on the firework control zones. I thought that was a useful point to bring up, and particularly the community work, which I think is very much an example of prevention being brought to the fore. Colin Beattie, Liam Kerr, Catherine Sangster and I think others also talked about retail crime. The impact on business is seriously, of serious concern. They would recognise the disruption and the harm that retail crime causes and antisocial behaviour related to retail crime to businesses and also communities. That's why we've made an additional £3 million available in 2026-27 for Police Scotland, specifically to help tackle retail crime. I also note that Colin Beattie looked at schools and standards of behaviour in his contribution. I will talk about youth-related programmes, which I hope will be helpful. And I want to record my agreement with Duncan Dunlop on the great value of youth organisations. I noted that both Don Black and Carol Mochan spoke about social issues, the roots of difficulties and problems, alcohol misuse, for instance, and they spoke about the importance of prevention and support. I wanted to touch on the Independent Working Group on Antisocial Behaviour. The Scottish Government has taken forward work here, and that work falls under 5 themes, all of which have been progressed. And I'm going to look further at that work, and I'm really keen to hear from members about ideas for future activity there. I hope that members feel that that touches on a number of the areas that they have raised, including in Midlothian for Colin Beattie, where I believe that there is, for instance, Scottish Government-funded activity on the Summer of Sport theme, which ties together some of the concerns that he had raised. I do want to touch on Police Scotland and the collaborative approach between Police Scotland, between councils, between partners at large, working together to target antisocial behaviour problems in communities. I think that that is particularly important. And I also want to reassure members that this government will continue to equip the police and continue to work with local partners to tackle antisocial behaviour in line with our manifesto and in line with our focus on all of our communities in Scotland. I was interested in some of the things that Catherine Sangster was saying about social impact partnerships, and I'm really heartened by the possibilities of social impact investment as a new approach to bringing together partners to deliver this vital preventative action. I thought Kate Nevin's comments in particular about the impact on different groups of people and in relation to new approaches were relevant here. So we're committed to providing a £200,000 Kickstarter fund to develop proposals for social impact partnerships, focusing on early intervention and justice, beginning with reducing reoffending and creating safe spaces for young people to divert them from antisocial behaviour. I thought that Michelle Campbell, in her intervention, was very insightful, and the interaction between Michelle Campbell and Liam Kerr quite important. I'm happy to speak to either of them further about that, and of course to any other member about the issues that they have raised. This government is also taking forward work at pace across manifesto commitments, for instance, on the seizure of e-bikes and e-scooters. I know that a number of members have raised that issue. Officials are working with Police Scotland to address the antisocial use of these vehicles, whilst recognising the constraints posed, such as vehicle registration remaining a reserved matter. Presiding Officer, I recognise that members quite rightly do not wish to demonise young people. Colin Beattie himself said that, as did a number of other members. Antisocial behaviour does not only come from young people. It's quite true most of them do not engage in antisocial behaviour. But our focus must be on diverting those at risk towards more positive paths to make sure, as Duncan Dunlop said, that there is a role for those in this chamber as well to conduct themselves in a way which is a positive influence. That's why the Cashback for Communities programme is so important and so successful, by investing a record £26 million from April 2026 to March 2029. We're helping to steer young people away from harm and, as suggested by Andrew Baxter, towards more positive destinations, including in Midlothian, where I hope it's helpful to say to Colin Beattie there are 5 projects running. And this Phase 7 of Cashback for Communities builds on a strong track record. I want to thank all of the people delivering this work in every local authority. Since Cashback began in 2008, £158 million has been invested in supporting diversionary activities, and that's supported 1.4 million young people. Phase 7 sees 51 projects across the country delivering youth work, employability and skills. And I'm aware that there is a broad range of youth work going on in the Midlothian area as well, which again I hope is helpful to Colin Beattie. Now, I accept that an effective system must exist to deal with people in conflict with the law. Young people and youth justice is featured largely today. And, Presiding Officer, I'm very clear on the impact of antisocial behaviour on victims and communities, including local businesses across Scotland. I heard Kate Nevin's points on those particularly affected. And therefore, this government is committed to supporting Police Scotland and other partners in the vital work they do, including through record funding, and we are equally committed to preventative action. This government will remain focused on delivering our manifesto commitments, delivering for victims and delivering secure, safe and stronger communities. So I again thank Colin Beattie for bringing this important debate forward, and I'm grateful to all members for their contributions.
That concludes the debate. I close this meeting.